Okay, one of our next projects for working with our signature is going to be a large banner. We're going to call this the sign banner, or the signature banner, but banner. And in the early 1900s, when office buildings and they started using a lot of glass wasn't expensive, they actually had sign painters, and their job was to go and paint names on windows, saloon, general store, bank, and then go to the office and paint office on the door and whose office it was on the door. And if you think about a skyscraper with 4,000 offices in it at the turn of the century, or 4,000 doors in it, all had restroom, janitor closet, they had a sign painter go and paint all those names in. And we're going to do something similar, but we're going to use our signature practice. And you're going from side to side of this 18-inch long piece of paper. Well, maybe your name is not that long. Maybe your name has some of the hanger down areas. So you're going to need a space underneath for the Y to come, or the G or the P to come down below the baseline. And if you notice, for some reason, this student has the Harris lower than LaShawn. So that's not good balance. Although this is bigger, maybe that was their idea. It seems to line up. It doesn't really even line up. It kind of lines up on those, so it makes these letters bigger. Maybe that was their purpose, but you have to think about a layout design. They just didn't paint them. They would paint them in the center of the door so that they were readable by the person looking for the door. So you're going to start off by just practicing your signatures. You don't even need a ruler yet. Just draw some lines all the way across the paper. And remember, if you have a name that's got letters that hang down, you're going to have to leave a provision for that. And the key is to try to get your name to stretch all the way across the paper and make them the correct height by using your guidelines, and make it reach all the way across the paper. And let's see if I can. And I've kind of run out of room for my R. Well, it's kind of squished it in, and we started there and it went all the way across. But let's say that this letter was a G instead of a U, and it came up in here into an M. That's how that would connect, is in this area here. It comes down, goes around, and comes back up and makes your letters. Same thing when you're doing the letter O. The letter O comes around from here and goes up to make the R, or the letter K. Whatever letter is after the R, it comes down and goes up. It doesn't go all the way down to the bottom and then go all the way up, because then that makes it look like a V. So they don't do that. They just bring those letters that end at the top, like the letter V, the letter U. And see, the difference between the U and the V is this sharp point right here, or the rounded edge. But the top is still the same. The letter O is the same. It's going to come up from here. The letter A is going to start down here. So these letters either finish and join with other letters up there. So if any of these letters are coming up to join another letter, here's your V. You're going to come halfway down and go up for the R. So the R is not going to come all the way down, because it makes it look like a W when you do that. So you're going to bring those things around like this, make that round there, and that's how the R is connected to these letters that are like this. So that's a little bit about that. So that worked out great. It reached all the way across, but you need to practice and make sure you always have your guidelines, and make sure you have your line down here. If you have others, let's say your name is shorter. Maybe it's ale and in red. See, you got to have the same amount of space here, the same amount of space here, the same amount of space here. You got the same amount of space up above and the same amount of space below. So really your artwork and your signature is framed out on a piece of paper, that you're using. All right? So You got to be thinking about that. I'm kind of trying to think of some names that might have lowercase letters, like, so we can use a Y. There's a Y, O, U, and let's see. There's a Y and a J, a J and a Y together. And I'm going like this, but basically they would go straight up and down like this. The letters to the letter Y, to the letter Y and the letter G. If they're halfway across, if the letter G comes down around here and comes up for the letter R, or the letter G comes down here for the letter O, that's how that looks. If you do the letter G and leave it like this, that's okay if it's the last, like for frog, it's the last letter in the word frog, that'd be okay. To leave it like this, or even make it go, you know, big if you wanted it to go big. But if it's joining up to another letter, it's going to need to come up. Or you just lift off and make your other letters not connected here, and then people will just know that those letters are close enough together that they go together. So a lot of it is you're practicing. What we really want to get you to do is to think about practicing your signature so that it goes all the way across the paper. This I left out the middle initial, so my letters can be a little, they're not as squished in. They're a little wider, the letters are a little wider because I left the K out. So you can decide what you want to do with yours. And again, if you're leaving, if you have letters that come down below, you have to leave a space and you have to make planning in your design for that. So for example, if this was my sheet of paper and it's not, it's just a cut down piece of the sketch paper. Again, I would draw my lines in here. I put in my guideline. I put in another guideline here. I think, okay, I'm going to have a little border on that side, a little border on that side. This area here is the same size as this area here. You know, as far as measuring, because I have to have these, let's see, what kind of letters? Let's do P, then R, E, T, T, and then have Y come down into this area. And the two T's are crossed together. Let's make this G, O, O, P for goop. I'm having a hard time coming up with names that have these hanger down letters, but that's basically what it would be. And then see that way you have a space all the way around. It's balanced out. It's as big as it can be in this area so that you have room to do this. Now, you might be able to bring these letters down a little bit and bring this part down here a little bit more and not have this big a space, and maybe make, you know, these letters a little bigger. And the same thing with these. You can make these letters a little bigger. And then you have that same amount of space up here and all the way around, the same gap all the way around. So you have to be thinking about that. So when you do have a signature that is the right length, and you show me all, you shouldn't even try to attempt to show me anything until you've done it at least 8 times, trying different, you know, your letters out. But once you have one, and you go, Mr. Romer, this is it. This is the one I like. It goes from one side of the paper to the other side of the paper. I got a small space on top, a small space on the bottom. So you take your ruler and you measure down 1 inch, and you measure up 1 inch, and you do all your measurements at both ends of the paper so that they're straight. You measure 1 inch here, you measure up 1 inch here, and then you connect these lines with a light guideline. And you put a guideline down here to between those. So there's my guidelines. I'm going to come all the way over here and make that guideline go all the way across the paper. I'm going to measure over here. And my guideline go all the way across the paper. So if my guideline, if this paper is 6 inches, and that's 1 inch, and that's 1 inch, that means there's 4 inches here. So that means at 2 inches in the middle is going to be my middle line. And then I'm going to go and then I'm going to erase my lines. I'm going to go over them in ink. And then I'm going to think about thickening some lines. So in the old days when they made these pens, let me find a piece of paper. These pens were a feather. And they would cut a point on the end of the feather. So if they cut a sharp point like that, then it would be a real thin line. And this is called the nib. The nib is the end of the feather or the end of the pen. So if they cut the nib with more of a square at the bottom of it instead of this point, if they made it square, then they would get a wider line. And because the nib, let's see if I can do this with a piece of paper. You're supposed to be holding your pen at an angle. You're supposed to be holding, all your letters are at a 45-degree angle. Sometimes people turn their paper. So as you're moving up, this is making a wide line, and as you move it forward, it's making a thin line, and then as you come straight down, it's making a thin line because it's not pushing this whole thing across and up. All that surface is contacted, and when you're coming down at an angle like this, and it's making a straight line. It's not going this way with the ink, it's going this way with the ink. So if you can think about, if you went this way with the ink, it would be as wide, your line would be as thick, as wide as this, but when you were going straight down like this, it would only be as wide as the tip of that paper, coming straight down. The nib would be coming straight down. So when these things change directions, the lines got thinner. And as you're lifting the pen up to finish your mark, you also are making it a thinner point. And that's how that works. So if you look at some other cursive writing or script writing, then you'll figure out how to take yours and where to make your letters. You're going to make them thicker in these areas and thinner when they change directions, and back to thicker and thinner up here at the tops, thicker, thinner at the tops and the bottoms because they're changing directions, back to thicker. So that's kind of the thickness is in the part in the middle. When they start to change directions, it gets thinner. So you can think about it like that. And again, you practice before you commit to the Sharpie ink.